The Babylonian creation story is the story of the creation of the world from above. But there's also a story of creation from below, from the people who are at the bottom, at the receiving end of imperial authority. This is the story that we have preserved for us in the text of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1. In the Babylonian creation story, human beings are created to be slaves to the god, and therefore slaves to the emperor. But in Genesis 1, we are told that human beings are created, well, beginning in verse 26 of Genesis 1, then God said, "Let's create a human in our own image, according to our own likeness, so they can rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created human beings in God's own image. In the image of God created them. Male and female created them. In the Genesis account of creation, human beings are created not in order to be slaves. We are created not to toil in endless labor. We are rather created in the image of God, so we can rule in the earth, so we can govern as God governs in the universe. Now, the syntax of the Hebrew is very clear on this point. Theologians have spent centuries debating what exactly this image of God is and what its characteristics are. The Hebrew writers of Genesis 1 are not concerned so much with such esoteric matters. They're much more down to earth, much more practical. They're not so much concerned with what this image of God exactly is, as they're concerned with what this image of God exactly does. Now, there's a syntactical construction that we have in English that's very much like what we have here in Genesis 1:26. If I say, let's go to the restaurant and let's buy a cup of coffee. What's happening in that syntactical construction is that I'm saying, let's go to the restaurant in order to buy a cup of coffee, for the purpose of buying a cup of coffee. So that construction indicates purpose. We have exactly the same thing in Hebrew, here in verse 26 of Genesis 1. Let's create a human being in our own image with the purpose that they rule in the earth. So we are created in the very image of God because God wants us to be empowered. God creates human beings not as slaves to do grunt work. God rather creates human beings, male and female, in the image of God so they can rule in the earth. We are created to be empowered. The beginning of stewardship lies in our creation in the image of God. We are given responsibility to rule in the earth as God rules in the universe. That great U.S. Senator from Louisiana, Huey Long, used to say, "Every man's a king." Well, Genesis 1 would add, "And every woman is a queen." We are created to rule in the earth. We are created to be kings and queens in the earth, to have power. But the power that God calls us to have is power exercised as God exercises power in the universe. This is not the power of the emperor, the power of domination, the power of enslaving others. This kind of power that we are given, according to Genesis 1:26 and 27, is the kind of power that God exercises. A power that is life-giving, that is empowering to others, that is boldly generous and abundant. In our next session, we'll look more carefully at how God exercises power in creation, and therefore how we are to exercise our God-given power as human beings created in the very image of God.